September 7th, 1944. Saipan Field Hospital, Mariana Islands. Private First Class Takeshi Yamamoto lay on a blood-soaked stretcher, his right leg mangled by shrapnel, his left arm shattered by a rifle bullet. Death seemed certain, preferable even to the dishonor of capture. For 3 years his commanders had drilled the same message into every soldier's mind. Surrender meant torture, mutilation, and execution at the hands of savage American devils. The Americans would gouge out his eyes, cut off his limbs one by one, laugh while he screamed. Better to die fighting, or take one's own life than face such horror. Yet here he lay, too wounded to resist, too weak to reach the grenade he had been ordered to save for himself. An American medic appeared above him, and Yamamoto closed his eyes, bracing for the first cut of the knife. Instead, he felt gentle hands checking his pulse, a needle sliding into his arm, the blessed relief of morphine dulling the agony. When he opened his eyes again, an American doctor with kind eyes was examining his wounds with the concentration of a surgeon performing on his own son. "You're going to be okay, soldier," the doctor said in broken Japanese, words Yamamoto had never expected to hear from an enemy. What followed in the coming weeks would shatter everything this young Japanese soldier believed about honor, warfare, and the nature of his enemies. Undermined to this moment of impossible mercy had begun with the fall of Saipan in July 1944. The battle had been catastrophic for Japanese forces, with over 30,000 soldiers killed and only 921 taken prisoner, most of them too severely wounded to commit suicide. These men expected death, had been conditioned to expect it, even to welcome it over the eternal shame of capture. Imperial Japanese military doctrine since the 1930s had taught that prisoners forfeited all rights to humane treatment. The 1941 Field Service Code declared explicitly that soldiers must never suffer the shame of being taken alive. Before every battle, officers reminded their men that Americans were racial inferiors who would torture captives without mercy. Japanese propaganda films showed staged images of American soldiers bayoneting prisoners and desecrating bodies. The message was clear and constant: capture meant horror beyond imagination. When Yamamoto first arrived at the American Field Hospital on Saipan, he kept his eyes shut tight, waiting, practiced with a professionalism that exceeded anything Yamamoto had seen in Japanese military hospitals. And first meal arrived within hours of his arrival. An American orderly, a Negro soldier whom Japanese racial doctrine had declared subhuman, brought him a tray containing more food than Yamamoto had seen in weeks. Chicken soup, still hot and rich with meat, white bread with real butter, canned fruit that tasted impossibly sweet, fresh water in quantities that seemed wasteful. The American watched him eat with an expression of concern, not hatred, returning twice with more water when Yamamoto's parched throat couldn't get enough. "You eat slow," the orderly said gently through a Japanese-speaking interpreter. "Your stomach, not used to good food. We get you healthy." Yamamoto wept into his soup, tears of confusion mixing with tears of relief. The devil Americans were feeding him like an honored guest, while his own army had left him with nothing but orders to die. The medical treatment that followed systematically demolished every assumption Yamamoto held about American barbarism and Japanese superiority. His mangled leg, which any Japanese field surgeon would have amputated immediately to save time and supplies, received hours of careful reconstructive surgery. An American orthopedic surgeon worked through the night, piecing together shattered bone with metal pins, suturing torn muscles with meticulous precision, determined to save the limb despite the patient being an enemy combatant. When Yamamoto woke from anesthesia, both legs were still attached to his body. The American doctor explained through an interpreter that he might walk again with physical therapy. "We're doctors," the American said simply when Yamamoto expressed disbelief. "Our job is to heal, not to harm." Stormed hospital pharmacy revealed abundance that Japanese military medicine couldn't match even in peacetime. Penicillin, that miracle drug Japan had failed to produce in meaningful quantities, was administered freely to prevent infection. Morphine flowed without restriction to manage pain, measured and distributed by nurses who treated enemy suffering as seriously as Allied agony. Plasma for blood transfusions sat in refrigerated storage, available whenever needed, rather than rationed by drops. Sulfur drugs, vitamin injections, anti-malarial medications, all the pharmaceutical weapons of modern medicine were deployed to save Japanese lives, with the same urgency Americans reserved for their own wounded. Yamamoto watched American corpsmen change his bandages 3 times daily, plagued him for years. Japanese military dentistry consisted of extractions performed without anesthesia by medical orderlies with pliers. At the American hospital, a Navy dentist examined his mouth with genuine concern, explaining through an interpreter that infected teeth could kill him if bacteria reached his bloodstream. Over the course of 3 weeks, the American dentist performed 8 fillings, 2 extractions with proper anesthesia, and even constructed a partial bridge to replace missing molars. Nakamura, a farmer's son from Hokkaido, who had never seen a dentist before conscription, received better dental care as a prisoner than wealthy Japanese civilians could obtain in Tokyo. When he looked in the mirror and saw his repaired smile, he understood for the first time that propaganda had been lying to him about everything. The food program at American POW facilities completed the demolition of Japanese expectations about wartime scarcity. Camp regulations specified calorie counts designed to restore health to malnourished prisoners: 2,000 calories daily for those recovering from wounds, 2,500 for men assigned to light work, 2,850 for heavy laborers. Even the lowest ration exceeded what Japanese soldiers had received during combat operations in the Pacific. At the prisoner compound on Guam, Sergeant Hiroshi Tanaka discovered that American camp cooks prepared meals according to Japanese dietary preferences, rather than forcing Western food on captives. Rice appeared at every meal, not the wormy, weevil-infested grain that Japanese quartermasters distributed, but clean, white rice, in quantities that seemed impossible. Fresh vegetables arrived daily, cooked in Japanese style with soy sauce the Americans procured specifically for their prisoners. Fish supplemented the protein rations, prepared according to traditional methods by Japanese cooks selected from among the prisoners. The medical examinations revealed the shocking deterioration of Japanese military health that soldiers themselves had learned to accept as normal. Tanaka, who considered himself in good condition, weighed 118 pounds at 5 feet 7 inches tall, nearly 40 pounds underweight for his height. The American doctor examining him found evidence of beriberi from vitamin B deficiency, early stages of scurvy from lack of vitamin C, intestinal parasites that had gone untreated for months, and chronic anemia from inadequate protein intake. "Your own army was starving you to death," the American doctor said. System adapted to starvation. The transformation proved measurable and dramatic. Within 6 weeks of capture, the average Japanese prisoner gained 15 to 20 pounds. Skin conditions cleared as vitamin deficiencies resolved. Wounds that had refused to heal under Japanese medical care closed rapidly with proper nutrition and antibiotics. Men who had accepted chronic dysentery as an unchangeable fact of military life discovered that American medicine could cure what Japanese doctors had declared untreatable. The physical resurrection came accompanied by psychological devastation, as prisoners understood how expendable their own government had considered them. They had been taught they were the chosen warriors of the divine emperor, yet their own commanders had sent them into battle, already half dead from malnutrition and untreated disease. The contrast with Japanese treatment of Allied prisoners made the American mercy even more incomprehensible. Through the Red Cross and interrogations, Japanese prisoners learned what their own army had done to captured Americans, British, Australians and Filipinos. The Bataan Death March, where thousands of Allied prisoners were murdered through deliberate starvation, exposure and execution. The Burma Railway, where slave labourers died by thousands from overwork, malnutrition and untreated disease. The hell ships that transported prisoners in cargo holds, without food, water or sanitation, sometimes for weeks at a time. Unit 731's medical experiments that tortured prisoners to death in the name of research. The systematic starvation of prisoner camps, where Allied soldiers received rations calculated to kill through slow malnutrition. Some Japanese prisoners refused to believe these accounts initially, dismissing them as American propaganda. But the evidence proved overwhelming, from Red Cross reports to testimonies of liberated Allied prisoners, from captured Japanese documents to the admissions of Japanese officers who expressed no shame about treatment they considered appropriate for men who had dishonored themselves through surrender. The psychological impact of discovering their own army's atrocities while experiencing American mercy created profound cognitive dissonance. Private Yoshio Suzuki, captured on Peleliu, wrote in a letter that would reach his family only after the war's end. "The Americans treat us with a kindness we denied to our prisoners. They feed us while their enemies starve. They heal us while we experimented upon theirs." Holiday celebrations proved particularly psychologically devastating. Christmas 1944 brought feasts to Japanese prisoner camps that exceeded anything these men had experienced even before the war. Turkey with stuffing, ham glazed with pineapple, mashed potatoes with gravy, multiple vegetable dishes, fresh baked bread, pie and cake for dessert, all served to enemy prisoners, while American families on the home front accepted rationing as their contribution to victory. Private Masaru Honda sat before his Christmas dinner in stunned silence, calculating that this single meal contained more calories than his entire squad had received in a week on Guadalcanal. American guards explained that this was normal, that abundance was America's natural state even during total war. The message was clear: a nation that could feast its enemies while conquering them possessed resources beyond Japanese comprehension. The work programs that began in 1945 exposed prisoners to American industrial capacity that explained their inevitable defeat. At agricultural stations in California, Japanese prisoners witnessed farming mechanization that produced yields imperial agriculture couldn't match. A single American farmer with machinery cultivated acreage that would require an entire Japanese village to work. Combine harvesters, mechanical planters, irrigation systems, all the tools of industrialized agriculture were deployed with casual efficiency that made Japanese farming methods look medieval by comparison. At canneries and processing plants, prisoners observed food production on scales Japan had never achieved. Industrial kitchens that could feed thousands, refrigeration systems that prevented spoilage, distribution networks that moved fresh produce thousands of miles, all demonstrated why America could afford to feed its enemies well, while Japan starved its own soldiers. The medical facilities at larger prisoner compounds revealed pharmaceutical and surgical capabilities that Japanese military medicine couldn't approach. At the camp hospital in Arkansas, prisoners witnessed surgeries performed under conditions that exceeded major Japanese civilian hospitals. Sterile operating theaters with advanced equipment, anesthesia administered by trained specialists, surgical techniques that saved lives Japanese doctors would have written off as unsavable. One prisoner, a medical orderly named Takeo Watanabe, who had assisted with surgeries in field hospitals, observed American surgeons performing procedures he had only read about in outdated textbooks. They have machines that see inside body. Kindness. At Camp McCoy in Wisconsin, which held the largest Japanese prisoner population in the continental United States, prisoners could attend English classes, vocational training, even college-level courses taught by American instructors who volunteered their time. The camp library stocked Japanese books alongside American texts, uncensored materials about democracy, human rights, and international law that Japanese civilians were forbidden to read. Prisoners learned about the Geneva Conventions that protected them, discovering that international law required the very treatment they were receiving. Many had never known such laws existed, having been taught that only Japanese military regulations governed warfare. The realization that their captors followed rules their own military had ignored became another source of profound shame. The religious accommodations proved equally surprising. Buddhism, Shinto, and Christianity were all permitted in prisoner camps, with chaplains of various faiths visiting regularly to meet prisoners' spiritual needs. At the compound in Arizona, prisoners constructed a small Shinto shrine, using materials American authorities provided. Japanese prisoners observed traditional festivals with American permission and even participation. On Obon, the festival honoring deceased ancestors, American guards allowed prisoners to construct traditional lanterns and perform memorial ceremonies for fallen comrades. The respect for enemy religious practices contrasted sharply with Japanese treatment of Allied prisoners' faith, where Christian missionaries were often singled out for particular brutality, and religious items were routinely destroyed or desecrated. In prisons, male privileges granted to Japanese prisoners represented another psychological watershed. Unlike Allied prisoners in Japanese camps who received virtually no mail and couldn't inform families they had survived, Japanese prisoners could write letters home, though correspondence took months to arrive and was heavily censored by both American and Japanese authorities. When letters did reach Japan, they contained descriptions of treatment so generous that Japanese military censors often suppressed them entirely, fearing they would undermine civilian morale. How could the government explain to starving civilians that their captured sons were eating better than they were? How could they justify continued sacrifice when prisoners described medical care superior to what wounded veterans received at home? Some prisoners, understanding the pain their words might cause, lied in their letters, describing harsh conditions that matched official propaganda, rather than American abundance to Japanese scarcity might prove physically dangerous to bodies that had regained health in captivity. Nutritionists developed transition diets that gradually reduced calories to prepare prisoners for the starvation they would face at home. "We're teaching them to starve again," one American doctor wrote in disgust. "We save their lives only to send them back to die slowly from what their own government has done to their country." The farewell meals served before repatriation represented one final demonstration of American abundance and one final source of shame for prisoners who understood they were returning to hell from a paradise built by enemies. Zemd revealed the complete scope of Japan's destruction in ways no propaganda could hide. As trains carried repatriated prisoners from ports to their home cities, they witnessed a moonscape of devastation. Cities burned to ash by firebombing, infrastructure destroyed, agriculture collapsed, civilians with skeletal frames begging for scraps. Private Honda returned to Tokyo weighing 145 pounds, 30 pounds more than his capture weight, only to find his mother weighed barely 80 pounds, her body wasted by starvation while her son had feasted in American captivity. His younger brother had died of malnutrition-related tuberculosis. His sister had resorted to prostitution to buy black market food for their mother. Honda stood in the ruins of his childhood home, wearing American-issued clothing, his pockets containing American chocolate he immediately distributed to starving neighborhood children, and understood that his survival in captivity had been purchased by the same abundance that was now feeding occupied Japan through American relief programs. The physical reversal proved swift and devastating. Repatriated prisoners lost weight rapidly as Japanese rations proved insufficient to maintain American-built health. Bodies adapted to adequate protein and calories couldn't survive on the watery soup and handful of rice that represented daily Japanese rations in late 1945 and 1946. Within 6 months, most repatriated prisoners had lost all the weight gained in captivity, their bodies returning to the malnourished state that had been normal during military service. Watanabe returned home weighing 162 pounds, the healthiest he had ever been in his adult life. A year later, he weighed 119 pounds, less than his capture weight, despite no longer being subject to combat stress or military discipline. The American body couldn't survive on Japanese food, he explained decades later, that followed laws rather than glorifying their violation. Many former prisoners became advocates for democracy during the American occupation, having seen firsthand that democratic nations could achieve prosperity Japan's militarists had promised but never delivered. Tanaka, the sergeant from Guam, became an English teacher who emphasized American generosity to generations of students. Nakamura, the farmer with the repaired teeth, introduced American agricultural techniques to his village, increasing yields 40% within 5 years. Honda volunteered as an interpreter for occupation authorities, determined to help build the Japan that American doctors had shown him was possible. Prosecute experience specifically transformed many prisoners' understanding of healthcare's role in society. Watanabe completed his medical education after the war, becoming a doctor who advocated for universal healthcare access and patient rights. He wrote extensively about the contrast between Japanese military medicine's disregard for enlisted men's lives and American medicine's commitment to preserving every possible life, regardless of rank or nationality. "The Americans taught me that healing is not a privilege but a right," he wrote in his memoir published in 1968. They demonstrated through their treatment of enemies that medicine's highest calling is serving humanity, not serving power. Every prisoner they saved was a lesson in what medicine should be. His writings influenced Japan's post-war medical reforms and helped shift Japanese healthcare toward the patient-centered model Allied occupation authorities promoted. Studies conducted in the 1960s and 1970s revealed that Japanese prisoners of Americans held dramatically different views from those who had avoided capture or been held by other powers. They were more likely to support democracy, embrace pacifism, view the American relationship positively, and maintain skepticism toward military authority. The medical treatment had proved particularly transformative in changing attitudes. When asked what single experience most altered their worldview, an overwhelming majority of surveyed former prisoners cited medical care as the moment their indoctrination shattered. Not the food, though that was significant. Not the accommodations, though those were unprecedented. But the act of American doctors treating Japanese wounds with the same care they devoted to American soldiers. That demonstration of shared humanity across the divide of warfare proved more powerful than any propaganda. Missions denied to Allied captives. They experienced the mercy their own nation had withheld from enemies. They received the medical care their own government had failed to provide its soldiers. Every injection of penicillin was a lesson in American industrial capacity. Every nutritious meal was a demonstration of agricultural abundance. Every competent surgery was proof of technological and educational superiority. And every act of kindness toward men who had tried to kill Americans was a message more powerful than any military victory could convey. In the decades after the war, as former prisoners aged into positions of influence in Japanese society, many recorded detailed testimonies about their captivity experiences. Their accounts consistently emphasized medical care as the most psychologically impactful aspect of American treatment. One former prisoner, now a member of the Japanese Diet, explained it simply. They taught us that our own leaders had lied about everything by the simple act of healing our wounds. How could Americans be devils when their doctors work through the night to save Japanese legs? How could democracy be weak when democratic nations could afford such mercy toward enemies? How could our cause be righteous when our righteousness demanded we die rather than accept such kindness? The medical care had proved more devastating to Japanese militarism than atomic bombs because it struck at the ideological foundations rather than simply destroying cities. These Japanese soldiers who had trembled while awaiting torture and instead found healing returned to their homeland as unwitting ambassadors of democratic values. They had witnessed mercy's power, experienced compassion's strength, learned that civilization's true measure lay not in how nations treated their own, but in how they treated their enemies. The American doctors who saved their lives had simultaneously saved something more precious, the possibility of redemption, reconciliation, and peace. In hospital wards across the Pacific, through acts of healing performed on those who had come to kill them, American medical personnel had planted seeds of transformation that would help rebuild a nation from militarism's ashes and forge an alliance that endures to this day. The lesson endures. Humanity shown to enemies costs relatively little, but achieves what violence never can. The transformation of hearts and the ultimate victory of human decency over hate.